Hi, this is Ken Jarecke, and today I'm talking pictures with Alex Wroblewski. Alex is a photographer. He works out of DC. Right now he's in Des Moines. He's shooting a lot of politics, and he's doing great work, and I wanted to talk to him, see how he's doing, see what the method to his madness is. We've never met, don't know him, so this will be uh, interesting discovery for me and hopefully for you. Alex, how you doing?
Hey, Kenneth. I'm doing well. Thanks for the intro. Like you said, I've been covering politics in Washington, D.C., and before that, a little bit in New York City. And I'm currently in Des Moines, Iowa, where the Iowa State Fair has taken place this week, and especially this weekend. Um, Pretty much all the Democrats that have come through to the state fair and are making campaign stops here in Iowa to try to woo the voters before the caucus next year. And it's been really interesting. It's a real change of pace. Uh, Washington, D.C. or New York, where I feel like a lot of the political events are almost like a movie set, or they're set up and tightly controlled by the campaign staff. And here in Iowa, things are much more candid. There's, instead of being surrounded by reporters asking questions like in DC, here there are Iowans and people they have to interact with, and they're asking tough questions, and it's a lot more free in a way. So it's interesting seeing the candidates in a environment where they don't have so much control. So it's a little bit more real here, and it's a nice change of pace. I grew up in Wisconsin, so it kind of feels like I'm back at home in a way, back in the Midwest. So it's been good here.
How long have you been working in on the East Coast then?
I've been on the East Coast. I moved to New York in 2016, and I've been in DC for 2 years now. And then before that, I was in Chicago and Istanbul. So it's been, but yeah, east on the East Coast for 3 years now.
Well, tell me a little bit more about your background. So you're from Wisconsin. I'm from Nebraska. Our last names rhyme. That's kind of a lot going on there. What? How'd you end up in Istanbul?
um, so I was kind of a late bloomer when I came to journalism and well, just college in general. I come from a real working class family. My mom worked at Walmart for her whole career, and then my dad was in the factory. So like college tuition was just always something that was, I kind of put it off. But eventually I was started stringing for the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, and they were like, kid, if you want to get a staff job, you got to get your bachelor's. So that took me to Chicago, where I went to college, and I went to Columbia College, Chicago, and the program, study abroad program, was actually, the tuition was cheaper in Turkey than it was in the States. So I did a semester there, and through some people I met there, I was able to do a couple trips, reporting trips to Iraq, and then after that, I scored an internship at the New York Times. So that took me to New York, and since then I've been on the East Coast. And my plan was kind of after the internship to really dig in and work in Iraq and overseas. But given after the election, the news really turned over to Washington D.C., and that's kind of where the focus is. All the news is coming out of DC, so got to be where the news is, or where the big story is. And right now it's in Washington.
So this is kind of frightening. I mean, I went a lot of similarities here. The reason I went to Iraq was that I had been working in Washington D.C. and I knew how to manage the velvet rope world of Washington D.C., where it's about getting access and and working within the system to get the kind of pictures that you're looking for. And that's why I went to Iraq, because it was the first Gulf War was very, very controlled by the Pentagon. And so my pitch to go to Iraq was to use my experience in DC to get access in the desert. So you've kind of started in the desert. Now you're back. We went from the desert to the swamp, I guess.
Yeah, you could say that. And go ahead.
No, I was just gonna. You go ahead. I'm talking too much already.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, what's interesting, I was reading that when you took that photo of the Iraqi soldier, you were with a government a minder, if you will. And I was thinking today that picture, given how the American military has really like clamped down on doing embeds, I just couldn't see like any photojournalist being able to make that picture today. And with the way politics are, it's somewhat similar. Everything's up control, and as photojournalists, it's our job to tell these stories and look for moments that are can thing about the subjects or who we're covering. And it's a different world today, so it's just interesting to look at the juxtaposition of the work in Iraq and politics, and it all really ties together. And it seems like no matter what I cover, every story comes back to DC in some way or shape or form.
Well, it is a different world, but there's so many similarities. It's frightening, really, because like you said, I was with a public affairs officer when I made that picture. It wasn't being sneaky. It wasn't um, anything underhanded on my part. He knew exactly what I was doing. The Pentagon had released a rules of engagement for photographers, for journalists, and one of those rules was you couldn't photograph dead people. You couldn't photograph a lot of things, but that was the main rule I broke, which was constantly being challenged in court. But
Interesting.
yeah, it was constantly being challenged in court, and so they'd get whoever the New York Times would get. They would the press pool, the group of media would win in court, but then the rules of engagement to trickle down the levels of command to my PAO, who was a major, it would take it might take a week. So even though the official rules had changed and we could show them facts of those rules had changed, but if it didn't filter through the level of command, it didn't matter. So it was very Washington, D.C. I mean, the rules set up by the Pentagon were written by the head of the Associated Press photography department in Washington, D.C. So the media and the government were working hand in hand in that regard. And that's a lot of what you see that same thing today, as far as
absolutely.
They're
absolutely.
They're the same kind of they've got the same type of agenda to everybody wants their access, they want their exclusives, but they don't really want to rock the boat too much, because that cuts off your access, it cuts off your exclusives. And if you're making $500,000 a year as a reporter for one of the networks working the White House beat, you got to kind of you got to make yourself you got to earn that salary. And so to earn that salary, you can't really just piss everybody off all the time. You got to play both sides of that. So that's that's Washington, that's politics, that's the media in DC. And I'm sure that's the difference when you get to Iowa.
Yeah, definitely. I think you really hit it on the head there with the relationship between the press and the politicians. And yeah, like I said, it's really refreshing working here because of a lot more of the candid moments that I'm able to capture. And it's nice to be outside of that, what they call the DC bubble or the New York bubble, where you're constantly, surrounded by professionals in the news business or working in politics, and you kind of get a little lost when can't hear what the voters have to say, because it's depending on what kind of media you're consuming, it's like as if we live in two different countries or three different countries. So to spend some time here, it's not just only about the photographs, but it's also really great to get a touch base with some folks out here, working class folks who aren't just constantly consuming media. It's nice to be able to step back and kind of see the bigger picture in certain aspects.
So that's I'm going to go to. I mean, that's those are great points, and that's why Iowa and New Hampshire are so important. So I'm assuming, like right now, you've got like you guys rented a house. There's probably 3 or 4, or 5 of you in this house, correct?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I'm here with Joshua Lott and Stephen Matawan, who's from Minnesota and Chicago, respectively. And yeah, there's been a handful of people coming through here from the East Coast, so I'm in pretty good company, some healthy competition. And one thing that's a little different about this trip than is that usually I'm on assignment for a wire service or a newspaper, and in Iowa, with I think everybody was expecting there to be. I mean, there's been a lot of work and a lot of things happening out here, so I'm not on assignment constantly. So it frees me up to be able to really get creative with what I'm shooting. I feel like work kind of what I've been producing here a little bit different than what I would be doing in DC or New York. And it might just also be that I'm in a different environment where I'm looking at seeing things differently. So it's been really good in the way. It's kind of bittersweet. It's always nice to be on assignment and get that paycheck, which obviously is important. But on the upside of that, not being on assignment, is that I'm able to get really funky and weird with the pictures, and try to get a little out there and make some just look at things differently. And I'm not sure if it's strictly because I'm not thinking about a deadline or making certain wire photos that will read easily, or if it's just that it's this environment and I'm just kind of looking at things differently. So
So what's the difference between a wire photo that will read easily and what you how you really see?
um that's a tough one. I think depending on the photography you ask, you might get a couple of different answers. To me, a good wire or a good news photo is something that, I don't want to say it like hits you over the head, but it's something that moves easily and is like a pretty clear, informative photograph. Photojournalism, I think, like is we're telling stories and trying to shed some light on whatever story we're telling, and it's informative. Whereas kind of, I think what I've been shooting is a little on the artsy side, and which also can be informative in its own way, because looking at things differently or artistically, I think, can, if depending on the reader or the viewer, might make them more interested in whatever candidate or whatever voter issue is that I'm covering. So in different ways, there's pluses and minuses to each types of shooting, I guess you could say.
So what's your goal? Is it to share information, which is basically free now. I can look at Getty's feed, I can look at AP's feed, I can look at all of them mixed together on Yahoo. Or is there something beyond that? Is there a difference between sharing information, which is free, or sharing knowledge, which is actually still valuable?
Well, I think I guess I would have to go with the knowledge side of it, and it's my work. I'm still trying to capture my own style, and trying to figure out what I'm trying to say. But what I do know, what I'm here for, is to document this really important time in history in American politics, and this country is. I feel like this country is really divided and almost in this type of cold civil war, and depending on who you talk to, like, it's as if, like I said, we live in two different Americas. So it's a really, I feel like, a pivotal time in the country, and a really important time to be documenting it. And there are so many, like you said, you can go on the AP or Getty or the Wire and see the same picture. So I'm trying to look at things a little differently, which I think is important. um
So I'm
so
sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, I'm just trying to capture a different side of it than just the typical wire photographs. And not that there's, anything wrong with that. Like I said, it has a purpose, but I'm just trying to capture a different side of politics.
It's okay to throw the wires under the bus, uh, under the campaign bus. Um, so this is the thing, and this is my opinion, and I'll just share it. And I know you didn't ask for it, but you can't reach an audience if you haven't given them a reason to look at what you're doing. And so if your photos are like everybody's else's, and if they look, uh, you know how it works. If you look at AP's feed, you look at Getty's feed, and they're really similar. They look, side by, they're standing next to each other. If you're offering that same thing, um, you don't find an audience in the first place because you haven't given them a reason to look.
Yeah, absolutely right.
So
That's a great point. And yeah, I guess I've wasn't anything purposely on my part with my work to shoot things differently. It's just, I think, for something I had to do, because otherwise I'm producing this very similar photos to my colleagues who are, shoot, or who are on assignment. So I might as well take the opportunity to that I can make different images and perhaps, more interesting photos. I might as well strive to do that. And to mention the wires, I guess I'd like to say, like, what the especially the AP and Reuters and Getty doesn't do reporting, as far as, they don't have reporters. Besides, they're photographers, strictly photographers. But the what they do journalistic is incredibly important. Reuters and AP are, they're trying to please both the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and all these other clients, so that they are more middle of the road. Where I feel like a lot of publications today lean more to the left or to the right to please their audience. And and I think, like, having that's really important. Journalism today is especially important because there's just so much bias news out there, and it's so easy to go on Facebook or turn on cable TV and hear reporting that confirms your beliefs already, or confirms your, political opinion. So it's important to have the wire services who are trying to be objective, and of course you can argue that it's impossible to be truly objective because everybody has an opinion. But I think as journalists, it's especially important to strive to do that. And, every day I see AP and Reuters doing just that. So my hat's off to them. And at the same time, I'm using the opportunity to try to make some more unique photos, hopefully, than what you see on the wire. Make sense?
No, absolutely, and I think you make a great point. And they I've got nothing against the wire photographers. They're some of my dearest friends, and they work harder than anybody. And they're under UPI, United Press International. Their motto was a deadline every minute, and they're out of business now. But besides the fact, these wire guys have a deadline every 30 seconds these days, and it's I don't know how they do it. I don't know how they're constantly transmitting. They're constantly writing captions, and they're shooting pictures in between all that. So yeah, I've got no problems with them. I just here's the deal. You're from my perspective, you're on to something really important here, and it's something I discovered a long time ago. Was that whenever I was trying to, when you'd pick up a day rate from, say, Forbes magazine, and you had to shoot a lit headshot portrait of some business guy in Kansas City, for example. As soon as I tried to do that Forbes thing, which somebody a classically trained photographer would have no problem setting up the lights, doing the thing with the business guy sitting on the edge of his desk. As soon as I tried to mimic that stuff that Forbes wanted, that's when I'd get into trouble. When you really start to make pictures that you want to make, that's when people hire you. That's when people notice you, not to make the pictures that they want you to make, but make the pictures you want to make. And I don't know if that's a viable option these days. I want to. So that's kind of my next question: is what's your end game with all this? You talked about the Milwaukee Sentinel. When you're stringing for them, you're kind of thinking about a staff job. Is that still in the cards? Is that still what you're going for? People just what's your end game in that regard?
A staff job would be absolutely lovely. It's just they're so few and far in between today. I think my end game is I want to be a photojournalist at the end of the day, and it's it's my passion, and it's not just photography, but the best part about this job, I think, is getting to know people, it's a little selfish in the way of getting, you learn a lot about these stories that you're involved in. And it's just the coolest thing in the world to me, getting people, going to places I would never go to, people sharing, intimate parts of their lives and talking to me when, I wouldn't be doing this without the camera. And it's just the coolest job in the world, and I still think that. And at the end of my end game is I want to be a photojournalist, and I think everything's going freelance. I hate the term the gig economy, but it's not just photojournalism. The way we listen to music or get a taxi is, the internet has changed everything. So, but at the end of the day, I want to be a photojournalist, and I think a lot of freelancers have to find a way to supplement their income besides just editorial. So it's incredibly competitive on the editorial side, and it's just also not really viable to be a full-time editorial photographer, unless perhaps you have a trust fund, which does happen. But it's yeah, my end game is I just want to keep telling stories, and no matter how slow the work gets, or no matter how little the paychecks are, living paycheck to paycheck, there's half the country lives paycheck to paycheck. And I'm thankful at the end of the day to have found something that I love and I'm able to do it, so my end game is just, just keep doing what I'm doing. And, photo, like I was saying earlier today, there's, as a journalist, I think we need good, fair journalists out there more than ever now. So I'm incredibly, fortunate to have found this passion. And I've had my mom passed away, but I had two parents that are incredibly supportive. So I got to say, shout out to my family for helping me get to where I am today. So
Well, none of us in this business would be anywhere without our family. They're the ones that gave us this foundation, this thing that you're building on, this this joy in just hearing people's stories and telling people, sharing those stories with other people, this curiosity, this work ethic. It's not an easy profession. You're probably doing 16-hour day. You got some downtime today, but yesterday was probably 16, 18-hour day at the end of the day. That all comes from your family. And that's the best journalists have this. They all talk about that, their dad, seeing their dad doing this, seeing their mom doing this. So let me just, I don't want to bust your chops, but let me ask you this. If you're because I had this conversation, might have been 30 years ago, and I had a contract with Time Magazine at the time, and that was a
Yep.
pretty lucrative contract.
Sure.
And so, and I didn't feel I was making enough money. I was making a lot of money, but I didn't feel I was making enough money. And I went to the director of photography at a magazine, and she told me, well, why don't you do some commercial work? And just to, I was young and I was kind of obnoxious, and I'd say, well, do you want the writers on the magazine staff to be writing ad copy on their weekends? Do you want that as a photographer? Did I lose you?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah. So as far as, are you asking if commercial work would interfere with how I cover editorial, or?
Well, I've turned down two commercial jobs. One was for the military. The other was for a cigarette company. My point is, you can't really go and do a story on Ebola on the west coast of Africa and then come home and try to sell cigarettes for somebody, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think commercial work really depends on the client. And today in politics, covering politics, I think, is especially controversial depending on the commercial client, because everybody, I think, has an opinion. And you know big paying jobs come with are usually tied into politics one way or the other. um I mean, I'm a as a photojournalist, I really try to adhere to the ethics of you know photojournalism. And if you look at my social media, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or my Twitter feed, I don't share my opinion. And there are journalists out there who are pretty vocal or advocate for one party or the other, and I still think that's uh, and first, on the I think it would really be case to case basis as far as the commercial jobs go. With a lot of photographers I do know who are freelance, just about all of them do commercial work one way or the other, but it's not usually a staff job or a contract for a long project. So I mean, like I said, I guess it would have to depend on a case to case basis, depending on the client. as far as if it would interfere with politics, or does that make sense? Did that answer your question?
No, I'm just busting your chops. I the solution to the problem is what has happened. Let me just go back. So what you're doing today, you know, you're you're sharing a house. You're with a couple of other photographers. You guys are all hustling to make pictures and get gigs and all that kind of stuff. That's how it always was as well. Um, you know, I grew up in South Omaha, so my first political photography was in 1983, 84, and that was just kind of catching the politicians who kind of came through town through Omaha, and I wasn't quite engaged, or maybe I went over to Iowa a couple times, but in 87 I was in Iowa all the time, and it was so, you know, I could drive, I had a car, I had enough friends, I could sleep on couches or floors or whatever. Rarely would I get, you know, motel room for $40 a night. I just shoot. But so, and this is how, you know, and when you did get a motel room, you'd usually be sharing it with two other people, or maybe just one person if you're lucky with two beds. It just, that's how it's always been. And what Artie Grace, you know, Artie Grace is a great Newsweek photographer, a great political photographer. And what he told me at this time about, you know, 1987 was there's always two ways that photographers get discovered. And one was every 4 years on the on politics, and the other was uh, in a war somewhere. That's when photographers made a name for themselves, at least in the United States. Those two events, and then that's when they go on to have a career. So, long story short, and this is what we kind of started talking about in the beginning, the end game. Um, we need publications, we need outlets, we need magazines, we need newspapers, and those are in short supply right now. Um, and if there is those, you know, like you said, we're all happy to make uh, you know, not a lot of money in this business. Photographers, photojournalists don't make a lot of money, but we do need options. We do need different magazines, and we need different newspapers, and we need them competing for our talents. I think that's the difference that from 30 years ago and today. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, you know the market. You know the editors. You're hustling every day trying to get work. What I mean, it can't just be the wires that you're picking up gigs from.
Yeah, at the moment, I'm mostly working for Bloomberg News, Getty Images, and the New York Times a little here and there. So that's where, you know, I mean, after 2020 is done, I'm hoping to do more commercial work at, you know, on the side. It's super tough. It's really competitive. Photojournalism, I feel like it's changed since I got into the business in 20. I started, you know, 2013 is when I started shooting professionally, and I feel like it's changed a lot even since then. Um, and it's tough for just about everybody. And you know, I great admire and looking at and like Andrea Bruce and these and trying to think of who else I was just had this conversation from, you know, this kind of like you mentioned Iraq and politics and how it's kind of where you could look at these big stories and notice, you know, these, you know, look for new talent there. And there's a lot of similarities in covering both, but in the strangest way. But I think like it's just become the media has shifted from like any overseas coverage to covering politics here, and if you look at Adario and Andrea Bruce, what they're focused on domestic issues here in America when they were mostly working overseas, and not to trying to put them on the spot, but everybody is having a hard time, uh, doing stories that matter overseas. And back to to Germany, to Australia, because the demand for coverage overseas has dried up, which doesn't mean those stories have stopped. It's just that it sucks. There's no other way to say it, but it sucks that we're losing a lot of that international coverage, or that those budgets have moved to Washington. And then even in with Washington, with politics being such a hot issue, it's still super competitive, and the assignments are few and far in between. I talked to photographers who've covered this is their fifth time covering the Iowa State Fair, you know, and more competitive than ever. So there's just less, I feel like, less work out there, and that's my personal opinion. From what I've heard personally, is there's just less work than ever, and it's just super competitive, which is really unfortunate, because, like I said, what we do is important.
No, I agree with you 100%. And what we uh, do is so important. It's just there has to be um, somebody has to break this wheel. Right now, the wheel is, I mean, it's like you said, it's lots of content. Not a whole lot of it's getting published real well. It kind of all looks the same on the internet, and it's all undervalued. So how do you do that? But that we're not going to answer that here. But I mean I do have some ideas on that, but we're not gonna get into that. But when you talk about domestic versus international, uh, you grew up in Wisconsin. I grew up in Nebraska. Iowa borders both those states. Not a big leap for us to go to the Iowa State Fair, because we've been to the county fairs, we've been to the state fairs. We know what
Yep.
cornfields look like. So when
Hmm.
I think it's more important, um, as a photographer, as a creative person, to be able to photograph what you know and bring some insight into that. So just because you're working in your own, where in a very similar place to where you grew up, doesn't mean that, I mean, I know it's important. I know it's fascinating, and that you're excited by it. And I'm just that's pretty, I mean, if you go to wherever, if you go to Cuba, um it's different, it's exotic, it's the colors are different, the light is different, the people are different, everything's different, and all of a sudden it's like photographer's paradise. I think the
Yeah,
really good
absolutely.
photographers, I think what you're doing, been following your work. I think that's I think that takes more talent, and I think it takes more elbow grease to get that kind of work in a place where you grew up. But the benefits, the end results are so much better.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like covering politics, or not politics, covering things domestically is a lot more challenging to make. There's that saying of, it's easy to make really interesting photos in a war zone, because it's given the nature of it, whereas states, covering the Iowa State Fair, it's more challenging. It takes a lot more effort, I think, to make really unique photos. To make unique photos here, it's a lot more challenging, and you're absolutely right. But it's just as important. I mean, this, like I said, the American politics right now. It's something I think everybody is really interested in. But yeah, absolutely right. It's a lot more challenging to cover something that versus somewhere more exotic, where everything from, like, the corner store to the the farmer down the road is going to be a whole new experience. Here it's everything's familiar, and you got to really dig deep for those moments or compositions that are going to make an interesting photograph.
I mean, my motto is, and I'm a longtime member of Contact Press Images, which is a photo agency, which that model doesn't really exist so much anymore. But our motto was, if you can't make pictures in your own backyard, you can't make pictures in Tokyo. You can't go, if you can't make pictures in at the Iowa State Fair, you can't make pictures in Ginza. And right now there's 1,000 photographers in Tokyo walking around Ginza and saying, boy, if I was just in Iowa, I could really make some pictures.
Right. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right.
The grass is always greener type of thing.
Yeah.
You said a lot of important things about your attitudes. I which I share. Walter Cronkite. Nobody ever knew how Walter Cronkite voted. We never knew what his political opinions were. I remember when Walter Cronkite was still on the air, but you know him from a historical perspective. That's something we've lost today. And I think one of the reasons we've lost it is because it's financially successful to be partisan from a news perspective.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. And I think it's dangerous in a way that we're so divided as a country. And I talk to, friends of mine who are like they're not on speaking terms with family members because they disagree about politics, and cable television and a lot of journalists, I think, are just, profiting off of the partisanship, and they're able to, they're dividing, pushing us further and further, and they're making money off it, and it's kind of scary. So, yeah, it's important to have objective journalists who are trying to be unbiased. I think they're pretty underrated at this point.
Well, it's always, we don't have, like you said, we don't have a common forum that we can all talk and we can all share our opinions and be safe, be just respected as fellow Americans, for example, who have different opinions. And that is really dangerous. Like you said, I always, how can you have a democracy? How can you vote on things and decide the direction of the country when you can't even talk to each other? And that's what these publications,
Exactly.
I just don't get how, I know there's money to be made there, but as a publication or as a TV station, whatever, as a cable show, if you automatically just remove 50% of the population from your target audience, how does that make economic sense?
Well, it seems to be working. Yeah, it seems to be working for that. And yeah, like you said, it's in some cases labeling half the population as like the enemy, or the somebody who's un-American, or I don't know. It's really a scary time to be to see the what's happening in the media, and it's the media plays a huge role in, I think, how divided the country is.
No, absolutely, and they've like we've talked about, they've profited from it, and they've pitted one side against the other. And I saw a meme the other day. It's like the media was just poking a stick at two people, like a red person and a blue person, and they're like, now do civil war. It's just, it's so nasty. I got turned on to your work by Stephen Crowley, formerly of the New York Times, great friend to both of us, great mentor. I know he's worked with you, and just to we're not just to there's an opportunity out there, and we haven't quite figured this out, but there is a market out there. There is that market out there for just good old fashioned journalism, whether it's something like Country Doctor or whatever, the Gene Smith essays type of, where you're just looking at people and telling their story. And I think I think it's a skill. I think it's a talent. I think it's an art. I just talked with Karen Malarkey last week, and she brought so many of those types of stories to print over her career, and those magazines were successful. Now I don't know what Time magazine is. I don't know what Sports Illustrated is. They're not part of the Time Life stable anymore. The Condé Nast stable, I have no idea what's going on there. There just seems, what I'm saying is, there's an opportunity, and there's people like you who are pursuing this work that could help build that opportunity. And I don't know what exactly, neither one of us have $1 million to just drop on a project like that. But $1 million isn't a lot of money when you're talking about, it's not a lot of money when you're talking about a feature film, even a documentary film. $1 million isn't a huge amount of money. So there are opportunities out there for people doing great work. It just, the vehicle hasn't been launched yet, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think you're right. And we'll see over time. I mean, people still love a good story, and hopefully over time, finally, journalism business model, figures itself out, and that yo-yo comes back up, because it's, like I said, it's more important than ever to have good quality, fair, objective journalism today, and I think the country really needs it. And to make that possible, we need to you know have photographers and photojournalists from all walks of life, and I think that's definitely changing today. And hopefully the financial side comes around to that, and we'll see what happens.
So if you had $1 million, what would you do with it?
Pay off my student loans. um, I don't know. That's a really tough question. I mean, like, I don't really have the answer for that, because what's lacking in the journalism business model today that's going to take care. All right, Joshua. I'll see you, man. What's lacking in the journalism business model today, I think, is finding a way to make profit off of good storytelling, and fair storytelling. Look at Rachel Maddow or Tucker Carlson. They're not technically journalists. They're opinion, or I forget what their technical term is. And they're making money, but when it comes to, like, print journalism, or the old-fashioned investigative reporter, that's just really disappearing. And I think it's in the public interest to have people who are watchdogs, or in the investigative team at the newspaper in your local town, or at the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, because they are looking at issues and stories that affect everybody in the public interest. And that's really disappearing today, and that's what's really scary to me, is that we're losing these storytellers that can save lives in a way, that can make a difference, that can hold the rich and powerful accountable. And if I had $1 million, I don't know what I would do. I feel like we're general public's up against the 1%, or I'm not sure. I'm not sure what $1 million could do, or what I would do with it that could really make a difference in journalism. That's a good question, and I think everybody's kind of trying to answer that. What can we do as journalists that are going to revive the craft and make people interested again in old-fashioned storytelling? Because like you said, you can go online and everything is free, and people expect it to be free, and we have to find a way to compete with everything online that's living online, whether it's fake news, or it's the cat videos that are just more fun to watch than reading your local newspaper.
So that's a
It's
great,
that's a really tough question.
no, it's a great answer though, because I think one, paying off your student loans is perfectly sensible. If you can be debt free, you can do, you can accomplish a lot. I mean, just like not having debt, you can go out and, you're not anybody's, you're not worried about that next job. You're not worried about that next, whatever, mortgage payment, car payment, whatever. So that's a great, uh, a great start. The other thing I really like about your answer is most photographers, just because it's like this, there's always this balance between photojournalism and the ego. The story's not about me, it's about the subject, but the very fact that you're the photographer kind of makes it, you're the most visible thing that's behind the camera. I mean, it's just your
Yeah,
voice, your vision. Okay, so given $1 million, most people would say, "Oh, I'd go out and I'd shoot this amazing thing, and I'd publish this book, and it would be so amazing." And it's just right again. It's just like, oh, it's not about the subject anymore. It's about your ego and look at me. So that's a great answer. Not knowing is a great answer. Not saying I do, the great American photo essay, not like just going and pulling that card out of the deck is a great answer. So good job. Um, that said, about being fair, I think I think that people want to think the best of other people. I really do. I think that's what they want. I think when you go to the grocery store and you're in line behind somebody and they have 11 items instead of 10 items, I think most people are just like, yeah, I've done the same thing, whatever. They want to think the best. They want to think, oh, that person, they got to run home. They've been working. They just got off work and now they have to cook dinner for the kids. God bless them. You know, I think that's where most of us are. I think the problem is, like you said, the cat videos, or the booty shots on Instagram. It's the it's the low hanging fruit. It's the low hanging peaches. It's this idea that that's just the simplest thing to consume. And I think that's what news reportage, if you talk about the commentators out there, it's just the easiest thing to consume. It doesn't make you, um, you don't have to bring your own opinion to the table. You've got a spoon fed opinion. You don't have to
yeah,
think about like what that means compared to what this means. It's the easiest thing to consume. So I think really everybody wants to eat their vegetables and they want to take their vitamins, but it's just easier to get that Slurpee from Big Gulp. I mean, that's where we're at. We're the media now is the Slurpee media.
yeah. It's the opinion side of what we're seeing. Is it's super digestible, and it's interesting and controversial, and it's yeah, it's tough to compete with. And I forget what I was going to say. Um,
That's okay. That's, I mean, all that said, we want to be good. We want to be kind. We want to do uh, the thing that's right, even when nobody's watching. I think that's who we are as a people. That
yeah,
said,
I think
go ahead.
I agree. I think people inherently are good, and deep down, they want to, you know, look at your neighbor as in a positive light. Yeah, I absolutely agree.
So that said, when it comes to politics, I'm like I'm like the worst. I'm just like no holds bar. If I'm invited into somebody's home, I'm the perfect guest. I always try to show them in the best possible light. I don't take, you know, unflattering angles or take advantage of uncomfortable situations. I'm just like the nicest guy in the world. But when it comes to politics, what I realized early on is, these political campaigns cost millions of dollars. They'll spend $50,000 for an event just on lighting the event.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They've got a staff. I mean, I've had them come before rallies and show me a Bill Epridge picture and say, "This is what we're really going for with this event." I'm like, "That's Bill Epridge with Bobby Kennedy. That's not like, you've." It didn't happen that way just by, it happened because it happened. It wasn't created. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Planned.
when it comes to politics and politicians, it's like no holds bar. It's just like, you're trying to manipulate me. I'm going to just, I'm just going to make pictures that I want to look at. I don't care if you look bad. I don't care if you like them. And it goes for not only the politicians on the stage, but the people in the crowd. Everybody's fair game for me. That's when I get my full Diane Arbus on. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's just my point of view.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said today, in DC and New York, I think a lot of the events are so orchestrated. Like I said, it feels like you're on a movie set where everything is planned out. And events here too, like or presidential campaign events, where whether it's Obama or Trump, they get off the plane and they drive to this campaign event that's all set up and everything is pre orchestrated. So it's, you don't see a lot of reality. And yeah, it's our job to try to capture those moments that do say something, whether it makes them look good or bad. And what I was going to say about we're talking about the media, and maybe the media is going in the direction of being partisan and being advocating for either party, and that might be where journalism is heading, is you know being more on the advocate side than trying to be objective and just give us the facts. So
Well, that's where it started. I mean, that's where we started. There's a
yeah,
reason that
yeah, want to be going
whatever
back to that.
the 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 Council Bluffs Democrat or whatever is that the Council Bluffs is their newspaper is called Nonpareil, whatever. It's like one of the few that didn't have supposedly a political leaning one way or the other. There was a Democrat newspaper, there's Republican newspapers. That's where we started. Then we got out of the yellow journalism period, and then we got into the unbiased period, and that lasted maybe 50 years, maybe 60 years. I'm not sure. But now we're definitely back to the yellow journalism, where the journalists, or not journalists, but the publications and the media, they only are talking to their side of the crowd. The sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I totally agree. Talking to readers, and I think a lot of publications are focusing on, trying to appeal to that political perspective.
Yeah, I guess that's just where the money is. I want to try to look at your feed here on Instagram, and I'm going to try to make this work. I don't know if it will record on the video or not. If it doesn't, I'll put a link to your Instagram on the at the end of this video, at below. So
Okay.
This
There you go.
can you see that?
Yeah, I
Hopefully,
can
hopefully
see.
it's recording. hopefully there's a picture of like our little picture and then a big
Yep.
picture of your Instagram. Hopefully that's what's recording. I don't know. So I saw this picture yesterday. You know, we talked yesterday. You're going out with Booty Judge, Mayor Pete, as you said, and I love this picture. I love this picture so much. And the next one I think is probably next. No, not. Where's your? Okay, let's just talk about this one. You did a tight head too. That's probably on here somewhere. And I love this idea.
Yeah, if you click on the little arrow next to the photo,
Oh, there you
there
go.
you go. So there's, yeah, that's the tighter one.
This is good
Um,
stuff.
Thanks.
And it's completely, we talked a little bit about the wire rules before.
Yeah.
This kind of breaks both those rules. Like, why didn't you pop a flash in there and fill that? No, seriously, why didn't you?
Yeah, so I actually did use a strobe. The light hitting him both times is my flash, and I traditionally do not use a flash. I never really used a strobe covering news, but I recently had a friend turn me on to a $75 strobe that is tiny, super tiny. It takes two AA batteries. It's not very strong, but it works really great off camera. And since I haven't been on assignment and I'm not on deadline, I feel like the freedom that I could, play around with this and shooting politics. You're frequently covering these events that kind of all look the same. So using a strobe is just another tool to get like a little bit funky with it and make things look a little different. So I've really been enjoying using a flash. So that's really what makes these photos is that little bit of light hitting his eyes in each image.
Okay, so if we're like the curator at the art museum, what do these photos mean?
Um, Pete Buttigieg is really interesting as the candidate because he's gay and his husband. He's not just gay, but he's a veteran who is toured Afghanistan and was a truck driver there. A total super dangerous job. Could have hit a roadside bomb in IE. Coming out as a gay candidate, I think really says a lot about where we are in 2019. There's a lot of people behind him, and listening to him speak, he's a great orator. And when he's answering questions in a way, he reminds me of Obama. So it's just really a fascinating time to see a gay man from Indiana getting so much support. It's just, I think it shows how much progressive the Democratic Party's gotten. So I think it's quite particularly important. And personally, I haven't photographed him before in DC. That was my first time shooting him. This last week's my first time that I've seen him and been able to photograph him. So it's been interesting for me too, since I
Okay, so
haven't
all
shot
that
him
all that
before.
is positive stuff. You said a bunch of positive things, but the images, if I'm a curator in a museum, I'm saying, oh, this is reminiscent of how the villain would be lit in a 1930s gangster movie or something like this. Orson Welles would light the antagonist this way. Um, so your pictures aren't syncing up with your opinions, and or not even your opinions, but just the facts on just who
Yeah,
the guy is. And I'm saying that's a good thing. I'm not saying
yeah,
that's a bad thing. Don't get me wrong, because like I said before, the first trick is to get people to look. You got to give them a reason to look. And so, and I don't want to put words into your mouth, but when like you look at an image like this, it makes me as a viewer, I have to think. One, it's an interesting image. It's pleasing to the eye. There's some drama in the lighting, but then I have to think: who is this guy? Is he is he the light side of the frame? Is he the dark side of the frame with that little bit of light that bounces on his cheek that doesn't quite hit his eye socket. I mean, what it makes me think, and that's why it's good. It has to be a good picture to start with before you can even start the conversation.
Yeah, the a lot of my great point about how I guess I guess I didn't look at it that way, but you're absolutely right. Everything I just said is you know
Well, you didn't share an
positive
opinion. You just
thing.
shared a bio. You just shared stats,
Sure.
basically, his batting average, whatever.
Yeah, yeah. What's interesting though is, I like I said, I'm just kind of chasing after this the idea of trying to make these interesting photos. And I guess I didn't look at it that way as far as somebody mentioned a movie director. I can't remember what his name was, but I looked up the guy's work, and it was a lot of like pretty sinister looking images. So yeah, that totally makes sense. And I think I'm just chasing this notion of trying to make unique photos. And
That's all you need to
although,
do. That's your
al-
job.
yeah, and although Pete may look sinister, I think it's kind of like the beauty is in the eye of the beholder, where the lighting is really dramatic and I guess sinister in a way. But I guess I'm not, as a photographer, I'm not looking at uh as at the candidate that way. Um so it truly is really difficult to be 100% objective, but at the same time, I'm chasing I'm trying to make interesting photographs to draw in the reader, or get the reader interested in what I'm looking at. So it's incredibly tough to truly be an objective photojournalist. And I guess it depends on who's looking at the photographs as well.
I don't want you to be objective. I want you to be fair. Those are two very different things. Objective is the surveillance camera in the bank. That's subjective. That's objective. Fair is, this picture here. This is like sinister light. You got the Confederate flag, but and you make an interesting choice. Normally the choice is to balance your strobe with the beautiful sunset behind you and enhance those colors, not go black and white. So I think that's an interesting choice. It's the same kind of sinister lighting type of thing. I don't even think sinister is the right word at this point. It's just dramatic lighting.
Yeah.
But it's not like you couldn't, just talking with you at this point, it's not like you couldn't go up with any of those three people there and have a conversation with them after making this shot.
Yeah, absolutely. And personally, something I've kind of noticed in my work is a little bit more heavy on the contrast. And I'm trying to kind of chase this aesthetic, this look. And using the flash has really helped that. And this picture I particularly thought was important because of the conversations that have come up with race and politics. And it's just a reminder of, the opinions and, freedom to express those opinions that I'm seeing here in Iowa.
Well, I mean, if it's winter in Iowa and it's 20 below, you think that any three of these people would have passed you if your car's broken down on the side of the road? I'm guessing not. I just
What's
that's
that like? Would they stop it? Would they stop and help?
Yeah. Would they stop and help?
I didn't talk to the folks, but we made, the guy, he looked at me and gave me a smile and went on his way. I don't think that they particularly thought I was, trying to uh, do anything sinister, and I'm not.
No,
I'm
I
here
know you're
to.
not. I'm just
Mhm.
saying that a person is more than just their cell phone cover. Is all I'm saying.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So this one, I want to go on to this next one. I didn't mean to cut you off. This
No worries.
Elizabeth Warren. I mean, this is really an interesting. I I glance at your feed. I don't really study the pictures like I should, but now that I'm looking at them, I'm seeing a lot of fun stuff in all these images. And this Elizabeth Warren shot. I mean, if it wasn't a bunch of if this was a shot with a bunch of I don't even want to just if it was men in the shot, people would think this looks kind of scary. This is kind of aggressive, right? But it's women, so
Yeah.
it's not.
Looking at these pictures, at first I was trying to capture the faces of the voters here, and who showed up to this rally. And when I looked through the tape, it kind of looked like a religious photo to me, something like spiritual. And I thought that was interesting because I feel like people or today politics is so entwined with this passion and how people feel about each party that in a way it draws similarities to spirituality or religion in that same passion. So that's what I thought was interesting about this, is that it kind of reminded me of photos that you might see at church or a
It's
mosque or.
it's a hallelujah moment. It definitely is.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Oh, I love this shot. I love this shot because it's a it's a it's a it's a mob scene, and I know exactly how that works as far as the crush of press. And this is like just screams like double truck to me. It's so good. And I don't know
Thanks.
how much you toned it. I mean, the sky, the Ferris wheel, it's the a couple of boom mics coming in, but it has that classic. This is very cinematic in that the eye can't help but go to Bernie in the middle of all this chaos.
Thanks. Yeah, it was super chaotic, but with the press scrum. And again, I wouldn't have.
Scrum, yeah, that's the political that's the PG term for that, scrum, right? I couldn't think of it.
Yeah, and it was tough to make photos of him because of all the press around him. And again, I might not have been able to make this photo if I was on assignment, because I would probably have been up there with the wire guys trying to get a close shot of Bernie and sticking close to him as trying to be as close to him as I could. But since I wasn't on assignment, I was able to you know free my eyes, free my mind, and get a little bit ahead and try to capture that Bernie's at the fair. And what I really like about this photo is the expression on his face. He looks grumpy, and Bernie's a straight to the point type of guy when it comes to his politics. So I felt like I was able to capture that grumpiness in this environment of fair, which is a fun, carefree environment. So that juxtaposition I thought was interesting visually.
Yeah, I love the fact that he's like one of the few politicians out there who doesn't comb his hair. I mean, he's just like, this is who I am, and he won't sugarcoat things. He'll just share his thoughts, his political ideas, whether you agree with them or not. It's what it is. So photographically, what is this, like a 50? I mean,
It's yeah, it was about a 50. I had a zoom lens on, so it was definitely tighter in there. Probably shooting at closer to 50 or 70. It's a 24 to 70 on my camera.
so if you're in the scrum and you got your 16 to 35 whatever, um it's not a picture, right? Because you have the chaos, but it could be chaos not at the Iowa State Fair. It could be chaos in an airport, just outside of him getting on a plane or whatever. I mean, the Ferris wheel disappears.
Yeah.
The sky, goes a little, unless you're strobing it, the sky doesn't go dark like you want it. And that's the problem you get into with that's the 16 to 35 zone. That's just, it's like, it's not a good place to be for lasting images. Love this. Is that one of your guys you're traveling with, or who is that? Just a random guy?
Just a random guy at the gas station smoking a cigarette, and I really wanted to get tighter and closer to him, but he saw me taking pictures and he moved over here, so I was able to go in the gas station, and I kind of wanted to capture, the Tulsi back that the Iowans, no matter where they are, they're kind of, it's an interesting relationship with the media and the politicians, I think, because a lot of folks I talk to, it's interesting to them that the politics come through and they get all this coverage, but at the same time, it's kind of an annoyance. It's kind of annoying to have all this, press and politicians running around. So I mean, it's kind of always there. I kind of wanted to capture that, like, here in Iowa, even if you don't care about politics, like it's just around.
Yeah, it's who they, I mean, they're used to it now. They get it. They've done this for so long. And I love this. This is the second shot that we're just kind of randomly going through here, but this and the shot of the three people with the sunset and the Confederate flag phone. They're basically just street photography in a political setting.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's not just, I'm trying to use the street photography techniques here with the voters, because it's to make interesting photos of the people living here, because it's not just about the politicians, and we in politics we get so wrapped up on who said what and who's in the news. It's not just about um, the politicians. It's about the voters as well.
So as we're going through your take here, I haven't seen, maybe the shot of Bernie in the midway shot. I think that would probably make the standards as far as like what is acceptable mainstream photojournalism today. But then we're right back to this one with you're cranking the camera a little bit to give you a little bit of blur. You're back off the safety zone of the Missouri school of things.
Yeah.
This is nice. This is
Yeah,
nice.
thanks. Yeah, I was again trying to I was using a strobe here to light Biden up. This is a interesting moment at that at this campaign event. He said that um, poor kids can can
Can make
do
it just like,
I
yeah, or just as
as
bright.
as
Right.
as yeah, as white kids, and it's like this Biden's kind of stuck in this moment as uh, he's saying is maybe not in tune with a lot of what the more progressive Democrats are saying. So I wanted to capture a more quiet moment of him, a more contemplative moment of this candidate who has been around for so long. And I feel like kind of wanted to capture the like maybe the energy or lack of energy that is around his candidacy.
No, yeah. So
Um,
just as where I don't see on your caption here of this barn, but I have the feeling that I've been to that farm before. Um, this is it seems like one of those places where every 4 years a candidate ends up on that farm.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of start us the my Iowa stuff off with a scene setter, and I felt like the barn, the farm, kind of does that here because you're not going to see that in DC or in New York, and I wanted to like kind of set the tone off with my work coming out of Iowa was something that was a scene setter, and I thought that really kind of did it. And again, like there's Amy Klobuchar isn't in the photo because I wanted to focus on where I was, and I felt like I chose that picture because I felt like that did just that.
I mean, you're pretty. This is how long did you work this scene? And this is a pretty. This shot right here is pretty sophisticated as far as composition goes. You've got your squares there. You got the flag and the tractor, each in their own square. You've got your vertical lines, and then you've got these three pairs of two people, or three pairs, I guess is what we call three separate pairs, kind of making this triangle to mimic the other triangles in your frame. How much is that instinct? How much were you thinking of those things when you made the frame?
I was, I like to always try to have people in my photos. I think it just, gives the photograph, gives it life, for lack of a better term, gives it, energy. And that was actually one of the first photos I took when I got there, and I shot, probably 1,000 some photos, and that was one of the first ones that actually kind of told that story the best of where I was, and um, bringing it bringing it around to Iowa, and where the candidates are going to be campaigning for the next how many months that
So the
just
prop
ended
the
up
proper the proper answer, Alex, is yeah, I saw all that and I meant to do that. Just so this is
exactly.
this is
Sometimes the first photo is the best sometimes.
yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's funny how that happens. You don't think about those things. You see an image, you make the image, and you're not really sure why you made the image, and then you make another 20 or 30 shots, and that first one is still the best after you've tried to kind of work that situation.
Exactly, and that's exactly what happened.
So this is your latest one, and I love it because it's like, for me, if you show up in an American flag leisure suit and you've waited in line, and you've got magged, you're out in the sun. I don't care if it's a Republican or Democrat, and you're a big guy. Uh, you deserve to go in there tight with the wide angle. That's just my personal. That's my political feelings on the matter.
Yeah, this was at a Pete Buttigieg event 2 days ago, and it was just 1 p.m. or 2 p.m. with the sun just beating down on Mayor Pete, and it was really tough to make photos of him. But this gentleman here with the outfit and the expressions on the voters' faces, I thought was really interesting. Again, it's like I'm trying to balance out the coverage of the candidates and the voters, and this is looking at this picture. These are the people in the area in the Muscatine, in the town of Muscatine, who showed up to listen to Pete speak, and um, I'm trying to balance that coverage out with like who, not just the candidates, but who they're talking to. And again, like his suit is just lovely visually. I couldn't help myself but take some pictures. And he was the everybody there is really quite friendly, and it's nice to be back in the Midwest where there's that hospitality.
No, and once again, if you got a flat tire in the middle of the winter, this guy's going to stop, and he's gonna probably help you fix your flat tire. Then he's going to take you to lunch. I mean,
Exactly,
great people.
exactly.
Well, I love looking at your shots here, and so that's the rest. I see we're back in DC. I love this shot you made the other day. I thought that was
Thanks.
a scene. You had to.
I'll that was a super hot day in DC. It was a weather story for Getty Images, and I have to give some props to Eric Thayer, who I was shooting alongside. He found this little water park in on the river in DC, and it was kind of a photographer's dream spot because it was a little waterfall coming. It was as if it was designed for by a photographer because a sheet of water was falling behind a little cement path that you could shoot through. So there'd be little holes in the water coming down, and that you could see people's faces. It was a really great spot to shoot in.
No, that's awesome. And now that you mention it, I saw some of those on Eric's feed as well. Love this. Very nice. Is that a person or somebody we should know? Oh, that's General Flynn.
Yeah, that was General Lynn. Yeah, who's leaving the courthouse, and again, it kind of comes down to trying to make a unique photo out of when you're working alongside a scrum of photographers who are chasing this guy out of the courthouse.
No, I love that.
And yeah, and the editing aspect of politics, I think, is just as important as the shooting side of it, of course.
So you had your strobe on this one.
Actually, I
No,
didn't
no,
have. Yeah, it was just the super hot that
bouncing off the
again
concrete.
1 p.m. sunlight, and yeah, the sun bouncing off that hot cement.
Yeah, I like that. Well, what's on your schedule today?
Well, it's kind of slowed down at the Iowa State Fair. So we'll next weekend or this weekend. I don't think there's anything scheduled with the candidates, but Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday they're all going to be coming through for a couple of different conferences, which should be pretty interesting.
Well, let's just go. We're going to wrap this up. I'll let you get on your day, but just kind of go through. There's people watching this that have no idea how you end up in Muscatine at a Mayor Pete event. So can you just share your workflow before I'm going to ask you to do two things that you can think about as you answer this question. The next thing I want you to do is recommend a book for the viewers. But right now, just go through the workflow on how you even end up at a politician's event and find yourself in the buffer.
Well,
Start to
it's
finish.
definitely, as a photojournalist, like the other photographers I work with, we really help each other out and look
So
after each other.
that's a good point right there. Where people think we're always competing with each other and elbowing each other and what have you, and that does happen, and we are competing with each other. But we're also when you got your crew, you're sharing information, like you and Eric with the water park. You're always sharing information.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was able to the way I was able to do that photojudge event out in Muscatine was I caught a ride with another guy I knew from New York, and I never met him before, but through mutual friends, we linked up and spent a 3-hour car ride talking politics and about the business. And it's it pays off you know to be a nice guy once in a while, and people pay return the favor in a way. And hard work and persistence, I
Personally,
think, is what really.
I don't want to have a New Yorker driving me around Iowa. I mean, they get memorized by the cornfields. They start to swerve a little bit. It gets a little dicey. They're not good drivers to begin with. But sorry, I interrupted.
We definitely stopped in cornfield pictures for sure. We did. That's exactly right. But yeah, who you meet, and like I said, we're helping each other out. But what got me there though is also like, hard work and persistence and not giving up. I could have stayed home in DC or New York and hoped for assignments there, but I'm really passionate about what's, politics in this country, and I'm following through and putting my time and effort into it. So it's, of course, it's always nice to catch a ride, but I wouldn't be here if I wasn't, putting that time and effort in. So.
No, that's a great point. But and to illustrate this, you drove. This is how it works in Iowa. You drive 3 hours. You shoot an event that might begin and end. You might get an hour. You might get 90 minutes of shooting time, and then you can drive another 3 hours back to wherever you're sleeping that night, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And then as far as
Yeah.
do you check where do you how do you put your day schedule? You talk to other photographers, but there's also are you on the email list of the different candidates of their press people? Just that's the inside the politics, how you get from how you even know who finds out first. How do you know that Biden's going to be here? How does that happen?
Good question. Yeah, a lot of the PR folks for the candidates will have an email list which you can jump on, and you'll get consistent emails every day about their whereabouts and what they have planned. And Coins Register has a tracker, which can be useful. Um, but what's really cool, I think, about Iowa as well, that's much different than DC or New York, is kind of like any photographer is welcome, where it's not super high security and a tight press list, and we're only going to have like a pool shooter and 3 of the wires come in. They welcome just about anybody who's local, from local media to you name it. It's a lot different, way of working here, where it's a lot more freedom, and it's a nice it's really nice to be able to get that freedom to move around and just get more access at these events. So it also frees up, like, as far as shooting different angles and all that. It's easier to shoot here in a way because you get more access.
So that's another good point. As soon as you're working with, some might be DC staffers, some might be local Iowa staffers, a lot of them are volunteers, but as soon as you're kind of the known quantity, as soon as you see somebody more than once, you're kind of given a pass as long as you conducted yourself okay that first time, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Anybody who might be listening who wants to get into the business, um, whatever interactions you have with somebody at one event, you're probably going to see them next week or at some point down the road, or 10 years from now, maybe they'll be the editor at that new client that you really want to get an assignment from. So it's a small world, and it's good to be respectful and to your colleagues, because you're going to see them again at some point or the other.
Absolutely. And so then technically you're using 2 cameras. What kind of, 3 cameras. What do you tell me about that?
Right now am using a Fuji XH1, which is my main camera, and then I have a super old backup Fuji from 2012, which is more of a lens holder. So but I'll touch on that really quick. I've been a long time Canon shooter, and I still have my first body that's been through 2 hurricanes, different war zones, and all that. But I shoot Fuji because the way it renders the color, skin tones, and in the White House or on Capitol Hill in this bad yellow light, whether it's tungsten or fluorescent, Fujifilm like seems to nail the skin tones and the color, which I really like. Especially when I'm on deadline for a wire, I want to be able to transmit as quickly as possible. So that's kind of why I switched to Fuji, and yeah.
So that's our tip of the week. Be nice to people, and if you're shooting in Washington D.C. under a bunch of tungsten light, Fuji has better color science, right?
That's right. Yep. And just like the film did.
Yeah, that was good stuff. What about credentials? Do you really need credentials, or you kind of like, or at some point you have more credentials than you can possibly have need
You
hanging
know,
around your neck?
I have a White House pass and a Congressional Hill pass that I haven't needed to use since I got here. I don't think I wore a credential at that Pete event at all. As long as you introduce yourself to the campaign staff, they seem to be pretty hospitable. So like it's a nice change of pace. Here the access is completely different, and so is the crowd.
So it's about personal relationships. It's about being a good guy, good person, which it kind of holds true in DC. These people that you're dealing, like you said, some of them will be get as the campaigns go on. Some of these people will be hired by the national campaign, and they'll start traveling with the campaign. And if that candidate actually makes it in some capacity to Washington D.C., they're going to make it there too. So you're building these relationships that start in Iowa.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll just be seeing more and more of each other as 2020 gets closer.
And then your little strobe, not to be just like a total nerd, but is that it's on a sync cord or it's wireless, and it's just like you're holding it with one hand and you're popping it wherever you think it's gonna give you some light.
Yeah, exactly. It's wireless, and it's off camera, and it's super small, pretty inobtrusive. So it's uh, part of why I never used a strobe, because they're consistent and sluggish. And this one's super tiny, and it's pretty super consistent. Fires well every time, and it was $75, so I got my money's worth.
Sweet. Alex, what are you doing as far as post production? I mean, you're shooting raw, you're converting, you're doing, what's your workflow like?
I use Photoshop, and then in photo the raw reader, the editor, I will adjust the clarity and the dehaze to bring out like those midtones and the shadows, and the you know to make that stuff pop. So it's a little heavy on the post production.
And then I noticed that sometimes you crop. I mean, are you shooting? Are you what's your goal as far as cropping or shooting full frame and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I crop in a lot, and especially with politics, I find myself, really trying to get to, what am I trying to say with this photo, or what's really important in there. And covering in Iraq and covering gun violence in Chicago, or in the protests in Ferguson, that was all full frame, shot as it was. And with politics, I'm definitely cropping in, trying to cut through that noise and that excess stuff around, whoever I'm trying to put in the spotlight.
How many more trips you think you'll make out to Iowa before the caucus on, when is that? Is it this December, or is it
Oh yeah, January
January?
and February will be super super busy. Yeah, so I'm going to be I'll probably be sticking around for a while, and definitely making a couple more trips through. So depending what's happening in DC.
And then New Hampshire after that for a week.
I'm not sure about New Hampshire. I think the freelancers up there kind of got that market cornered, so I'll probably leave that up to them. But we'll see what happens. I guess I'm kind of playing it by ear, and we'll go from there.
The nice thing about New Hampshire is it's a lot smaller than Iowa, and the people are just as nice and friendly and weird.
Yeah, I'm sure. That sounds fun too.
No, it's a blast. So, do you have a book to recommend? Something that really inspired you, or at least something?
Yeah, I constantly find myself going back to Eugene Richards' work, and uh, some of he and he wasn't, I love James that way, and
You gotta
I
repeat
always
all. I
wanted to be an
lost.
overseas photographer.
We lost our
Oh,
connection there.
sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead and start at the beginning of your book recommendation because I didn't get any of that.
Okay. Um, can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're good.
Can you still hear me?
Yeah,
Okay, so yeah, I constantly find myself going back to Eugene Richards, and the first book of his work I picked up was Cocaine True, Cocaine Blue, and as a aspiring photojournalist, I always look up to James Naue and Lindsay Dario and Brian Denton and the overseas folks, and I still greatly admire them. But with Gene Richards, he was working domestically and telling these stories that are really difficult to, of everyday American life, and kind of like what we said earlier, it's easy to shoot these sexy photos overseas, but it's difficult to work here at home. And throughout his career, he's always uh, really pushed the envelope as far as getting really intimate with the you know Americans here and these issues that affect us all, and I know he's somebody who's like really struggled to throughout his career, and he's just consistently always doing good work, and I just greatly admire him, and a lot of photographers that I look up to who are mentors or friends of mine, like Carlos Javier Ortiz, I draw inspiration from Gene Richards as well. So he's just somebody that to me is always, every time I look at his work, it's always still inspiring, like I've seen it for the first time.
that's such a great choice, Alex. It's probably a photographer that not a lot of people have heard of at this point. I mean, he was so huge and did such great work. You know, and he's still a great photographer, but he's so good. And what he did, it kind of all fits into what we were talking about today, because he actually had his own newspaper and he was working in a small community. You know, he knew everybody in his community, and it wasn't exotic. It was just true stories, and that's where that work came out of. Before he went on to work for places like Life magazine under Peter Howe and stuff like that. So that's just great, and so glad you brought him up. Um, Thanks, Alex. Keep up the good work. I'm really rooting for you, and I'm loving what you're
Thanks,
doing.
Kenneth. Thanks for your time. I appreciate it. And yeah, we covered a lot of ground, and you know, I always learn a little bit about myself when talking to folks like yourself. So appreciate it.
Hope to see you out there. Keep up the good work. Ciao.
All right. Thanks, Kenneth. All right.